Yeah, sure. Let me take a look. Man, I have had the flu. Apparently, influenza 4. I don't know what 1, 2, and 3 were like, but 4 has been no joke. Most true crime buffs have heard the story of Ricky McCormick. If you need a little reminder, he was the 41-year-old man found deceased in the outskirts of St. Louis, Missouri. But what makes his story memorable are the 2 undecipherable cryptograms that were found with him. The murder and the code remain uncracked. Now we'll talk about the notes, but there's an aspect to Ricky's story that really doesn't get talked about that much, strangely enough. And that's what Ricky was up to in the time preceding his death and who he was spending his time with. Ricky McCormick always seemed a little bit different than his peers. His mother, Frankie Sparks, described him as the R word. Geez, Mom. He did have an almost brotherly relationship with his cousin, Charles McCormick, for most of his life. Charles would say that Ricky would often talk like he was in a whole other world. He suspected that Ricky may have had schizophrenia or maybe was bipolar. Ricky and his Aunt Gloria McCormick, better known as Cookie, had a really close relationship, and she said that Ricky went to see a psychiatrist once, and the psychiatrist said that Ricky had a brick wall in his mind. He said that Ricky refused to break that wall. He didn't like the life of living poor, and he had an active imagination. And that's important. That is very important to remember. Eventually, Ricky found himself in some trouble. In November of 1992, St. Louis police arrested the 34-year-old McCormick for having fathered 2 children with a girl younger than 14. Actually, yeah, she was 11. Court files protect the girl's identity, and McCormick's mother and aunt knew the girl simply by her nickname, Pretty Baby. And I'm just wondering why, nobody questioned that. Pretty baby being the key word. But no one did question it, and Ricky went to trial. His public defender had noted that she had reasonable cause to believe that Ricky was suffering from some mental disease or defect, and she was probably right. Regardless, in September of 1993, Ricky pleaded guilty to first-degree SA, and state inmate 503506 would spend 13 months behind bars at the Farmington Correctional Institute. Ricky's relationship with Pretty Baby wouldn't be the last obvious lapse of good judgment, unfortunately. McCormick had some street smarts and a criminal record, but he was generally considered to just be naive to the world. The same cannot be said for the men who ran the Amoco gas station at 1401 Shoto Avenue, south of downtown St. Louis, where Ricky sometimes worked. There are a lot of sketchy Amoco stations in this city, and I've been to all of them. But that one, whole other level. If someone tries to tell you that crime has no address, it does. And it's 1401 Shoto. Okay, I am going to say some names wrong. I'm doing my best. I speak a little Southern Illinois and Eastern Missouri, and that's really about it. So please forgive me. Fawaz M. Hamdan, the original owner of the business, killed his neighbor with a butcher knife during a front yard argument in May 1994. He later died in Missouri's Potosi Correctional Center while serving a life sentence for second-degree murder. Seems like a nice guy. Juma Hamdala, a Palestinian immigrant who until 2002 used the name David Radigan, took over as president of the business. Juma employed his brother, Bab Hamdala. Henceforth within this video, he will be referred to as Bab. Not Baha, not Bob, Bab. That way it makes him sound like a nice old man who would give you drugs at a Jimmy Buffett concert instead of a scary killer guy. Who would just want to go by Bob anyway? That guy wants to go by Bob. We're not having it. Despite their familial ties, the two had a rocky relationship. In August of 1999, less than 2 months after McCormick's death, police from Maryland Heights investigated an incident in which Juma allegedly shot Baha Bob. Baha Bob survived and filed no charges, but according to police records, detectives looking into the shooting gathered information allegedly linking Baha Bob, quote, to black gang members in St. Louis City and narcotics use, end quote. I don't know why they said it like that, probably because it's Maryland Heights. I said what I said. The report also noted that Baha tended to be violent and in possession of several weapons, which include handguns and knives. Fun guy. Among the Hamdala brothers, another Jamil Hamdala is a registered sex offender. Baha Bob appears to be the most volatile. Police reports and witness statements spanning several years illustrate repeated episodes of violence that seem to accompany him wherever he went. Baha Bob was just a ball of angry, violent energy, and I wonder if they still invite him for Christmas dinner. No Thanksgivings for Baha Bob. I mean, I wouldn't. That would be a mess. Could you imagine? Shortly after moving to St. Louis in 1997 from Cleveland, Ohio, thank you, Cleveland, then 22-year-old Baha Bob was cruising the streets of St. Louis in a blue Mazda Protege when a police detective saw him pull up alongside a man named Terrence Clark. He leaned out his car window and he fired a shot at Terrence with a .38 caliber revolver. Clark escaped unharmed. Baha Bob was arrested but never prosecuted. 9 months later, on the evening of March 4th, 1998, Baha Bob was visiting one of his older brothers, Bajat Hamdala, at his job at the Family Market, a small corner grocery store in the Tower Grove East neighborhood. They got into an argument, and Baha Bob allegedly grabbed a gun and opened fire on Bajat from across the street. A bullet tore into the left side of Bajat's abdomen and knocked him to the ground. Baha Bob jumped into his car and sped off. The eyewitness reports, including that of the manager who knew Baha Bob from frequent visits to the store, were consistent in the police report. But a bloodied Bajat, either out of fear or a remaining shred of fraternal loyalty, told police he had never seen his assailant before, and he described him as a goateed Hispanic man, rather than his 5'10", 225-pound Middle Eastern brother. Jeez, Bajat. 6 days later, Baha Bob turned himself in and was arrested on a felony charge of first-degree assault. But Bajat told police he did not wish to prosecute. State court files show no record of the case. That's crazy. That's crazy. Later that same month, while working at the family's Amoco station, Baha Bob was arrested again. This time on a felony charge of second-degree assault for allegedly beating a man named Elro Carr with a rusty hammer. Baha Bob allegedly threatened to kill Carr, and Carr was described by his family and acquaintances as a sometimes homeless drug addict. So he was probably panhandling, and Baha Bob didn't like that. So Baha Bob said, quote, "I figured I'd just take care of this myself," end quote. That's proactive, Baha Bob. Good job. On August 7th, 1998, 2 weeks before Carr's case against Baha Bob was slated to go to court, Carr was gunned down just blocks from the Amoco station on a residential street in the neighboring housing project. The pending assault charges against Baha Bob died that night with Carr. Carr's murder remains unsolved and police made no arrests, but confidential informants told police that Carr was, quote, "killed at the behest of Baha Hamdala," end quote. There would be more violence to come. Minutes before sunrise on June 15th, 1999, about 2 weeks before his death, Ricky McCormick walked up to the counter at the Greyhound bus terminal downtown and purchased a one-way ticket to Orlando. It would turn out to be the last of at least 2 brief trips to Florida he made that year. It's not clear whom McCormick met during his stay at room 280 at the Econo Lodge in Orlando, but Phone records show he or his girlfriend, Sandra Jones, made a flurry of calls to people in Central Florida a couple weeks ahead of their arrival. Jones and McCormick exchanged a similar barrage of short phone calls during the 2 days McCormick spent in Orlando. He made at least one call to that St. Louis gas station where he worked. Sandra Jones would later tell police she suspected that Ricky went down to Florida to pick up marijuana. According to a Sheriff's Department investigative report, Jones's explanation went like this. McCormick would accept offers to pick up and deliver packages for money. He made trips to Florida before and on several occasions brought marijuana into the apartment that he shared with Jones in the Clinton Peabody housing project south of downtown. The drugs would usually be sealed in Ziploc bags rolled together into bundles about the size of baseballs. McCormick told Jones he was holding stashes of weed for Baja Bob. McCormick never liked to talk about his excursions to Orlando, but he seemed different when he got back the last time, Jones told the police. He seemed scared. It was true that McCormick's already unsettled lifestyle became more erratic after he came back. It's as if he sensed trouble around the corner, but didn't know where to turn. McCormick used much of his time during his last days to seek out medical care, or perhaps more accurately, a safe place to stay. Around 3 o'clock the afternoon of June 22nd, 1999, McCormick walked into the Barnes-Jewish Hospital's emergency room complaining of chest pains and shortness of breath. And this was nothing new. McCormick had a history of ER visits, and he had suffered from asthma and chest pains since he was a child. He told his doctors he didn't abuse drugs or alcohol, a statement which friends and family do back up. It didn't help, however, that he smoked at least a pack of cigarettes a day since he was about 10 years old, and drank coffee by the gallon. By his own estimate, he told his doctors he downed more than 20 caffeinated beverages a day. Man. Doctors did rule out a heart attack, but admitted McCormick for observation and kept him there for 2 days. Ricky left the hospital on June 24th with orders to return for follow-up visits in the coming week. Sadly, he would never make it to those appointments. McCormick took a bus to his Aunt Cookie's apartment after leaving Barnes-Jewish and visited with her for a little bit. Her home had always been a sanctuary for him, and he maintained a closer relationship with Gloria than his own mother, who lived just around the corner. Cookie said, "Everyone needs someone to talk to every now and then. Ricky would come visit and talk with me." But he revealed little this time, chatting just a bit before getting up to leave. It was late afternoon, and Ricky waved off others to drive him wherever he needed to go. Cookie's last image of Ricky is of him walking down the street. Around 5 p.m. the next day, June 25th, McCormick entered the emergency room at Forest Park Hospital, less than 2 miles from Barnes-Jewish. It doesn't exist anymore, and I'm telling you, there's a good reason for that, but that's a whole other video. This time, he complained that he was having trouble breathing following an afternoon of grass cutting. Doctors diagnosed his wheezing as another asthma flare-up. He was not admitted, however, and was officially released at 5:50 p.m. It's not clear when he actually left the hospital. Cookie says she heard McCormick spent that night in the waiting room before leaving the hospital the next morning. I mean, it really sounds like he does not want to be out in those streets. Ricky's girlfriend Jones told police that she talked with McCormick on the phone at about 11:30 a.m. on June 26. He told her he was out of the hospital and was on his way to the Amico to get a bite to eat. At least one gas station employee told police he saw McCormick there the next day on June 27th. When McCormick left the gas station on June 27th, he had at most hours to live. Medical examiners determined he was definitely dead that same day. Cookie McCormick believes that Ricky's hospital visits were an attempt to find a place to hide out where he could just lay low. She says, quote, "Maybe he knew he got into something that put his life on the line. He knew he could have stayed here, but maybe he didn't want to put my life on the line." End quote. Man, if it hadn't been for Pretty Baby, the 11-year-old, my heart would be breaking right now for Ricky McCormick. I just don't know how to feel about him. I don't. I mean, of course, it's terribly sad for his cousin and for his Aunt Cookie. Terribly sad. But 11 years old. I know that Ricky had some problems. I don't know if he knew right from wrong, but I have a lot of trouble getting past Pretty Baby. When Ricky's corpse turned up on June 30th, 1999, his girlfriend Joan's thoughts turned immediately to Baja Bob. After McCormick returned from this trip south, Joan said she suspected Ricky might have done something wrong in Orlando. If anyone was going to hurt McCormick, she told investigators, it would probably be Bob Hamdala. I think Baja Bob would hurt pretty much anyone. Ricky McCormick's remains were well on their way towards fertilizing the soil when investigators arrived to the scene. Filthy Lee blue jeans and a stained white t-shirt, they clung to his scrawny 5'6" frame. Although it had just been 3 days since he disappeared, the flesh on his outstretched hands was already rotted to the point that his fingertips, just below the tops of his knuckles, had fallen off and lay next to him in the weeds. Now it gets hot here in St. Louis. I'm talking hot. But that hot? How his corpse ended up face down in this cornfield in rural St. Charles County, 20 miles from where he worked and lived near downtown St. Louis, was anyone's guess. And believe me, St. Charles County is like the moon to city people. Public transportation isn't great here, although it's improved leaps and bounds since the 90s. Ricky would have had no way on his own to get out there. Plus, that little sliver of land between the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers has a reputation. It's been a body dump for years. In 1995, authorities discovered the bullet-ridden body of an alleged prostitute in an abandoned house along the same stretch of U.S. Route 67. 2 years after McCormick's death, state road crews mowing grass some 300 yards away from where he was found were the nude bodies of 2 more women. I'm not 100% sure, but I think at least close by was where Maury Travis dumped his victims. God, I hate saying dumped. There has to be something in between dumped and laid to rest. I don't know. Advanced decomposition made an autopsy of McCormick very difficult. Following a thorough examination of the 72 pounds of bones and flesh that survived the exposure to the elements, pathologists with the St. Charles County Medical Examiner's Office ultimately ruled McCormick's cause of death as undetermined. Yet police suspected foul play. Homicide detectives searched the 41-year-old victim's pockets for clues and interviewed his relatives, girlfriend, and others who knew him. Soon leads began to run dry, though, and a stack of other cases piled up on investigators' desks. Before long, McCormick appeared to join the ranks of countless other poor, indigent men whose short lives ended under suspicious circumstances, only to be forgotten. 12 years passed, and then everything changed. In March 2011, FBI officials made a rare and remarkable revelation seemingly out of the blue. Dan Olson, chief of the Bureau's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, or CRRU, disclosed for the first time the existence of 2 pages of handwritten encrypted notes found stuffed in a pocket of McCormick's jeans. Unable to decipher the tangle of letters and numbers, the FBI released copies to the public with a plea for assistance to hardcore puzzle solvers and wannabe sleuths alike. And that would not be me. I mean, respect to people who can do that. I'm just like, don't come at me with your Sudoku or your word finds. No, I don't want it. I am way too impatient for that. Turns out McCormick's riddle, allegedly written by a man who could hardly write his own name, has stumped the world's foremost codebreakers. They remain so baffled, in fact, that McCormick's notes now rank 3rd on the CRRU's list of top unsolved cases, only behind the Zodiac's unbroken ciphers and a secret threat letter written to an undisclosed public agency about 40 years ago. Well, I mean, if that one hasn't happened yet, let it go. In September of 2009, CCRU looked outside for help. They presented the McCormick puzzle to a room of about 25 amateur codebreakers gathered in Niagara Falls, Ontario, for the annual convention of the American Cryptogram Association. Man, I bet that gets wild. The challenge generated interest, but association members have been unable to make any breakthroughs. Some have suggested the notes are meaningless, just random scribblings of a man who by all accounts was functionally illiterate and demonstrated a low IQ. The CCRU, though, is quick to argue otherwise. They're convinced the codes could contain leads about where McCormick was or with whom he met in the last hours before his corpse was abandoned to rot along with his secrets. Ricky's family had stated that he used to write in code all the time and they could never figure it out. So just a quick recap. We have a dead body out in St. Charles County with a couple of cryptic notes stuffed in his jeans pocket. We also have an incredibly violent Baja Bob that Ricky was probably running drugs for. Do I think those notes are more important than the situations Ricky found himself to be in right before his death and the people he had been spending time with? Absolutely not. So I don't think it has to be either or. They're not necessarily meaningless scribbles, and they're not necessarily going to contain any information that's going to help solve his case. Ricky lived in a fantasy world. He spent a lot of his time trying to escape a life that wasn't really always that easy. Remember, the psychiatrist said that Ricky had built a brick wall in his mind that he refused to break. I think those notes were just part of the fantasy. Ricky wanted to escape. He wouldn't have written down the things that were troubling him. Of course, this is just my opinion, and those notes could be meaningless, or they could be very meaningful to Ricky. In fact, they could mean something different every time he looks at them. But if those notes keep the police interested in Ricky's case, so be it. I think the cops really, really wanted Baja Bob. Maybe they still do. And that guy is proved to have a Teflon coating. I think the police are desperately hoping that there's something in those notes that will lead them to Baja Bob, so they could finally get him on something. Even after the release of the cryptograms and the widespread media attention, there haven't been any arrests or any significant movement in the case. The secrets remain buried and the codes remain as mysterious as the events that precipitated McCormick's death. Ricky McCormick, you are problematic, but rest in peace, brother.